Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I have got a couple of slides. One's reasonably important. So I can just get to the bit that I want. We can get to the slideshow bit, but I've now got a bar at the top, so I can't see anything else. Fantastic. There we go. Right, can everybody see that now?
Yep, you're good.
Good. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Darrell Slevin. I'm from Link Treasury Services. So we are a treasury investment and asset finance advisor to the public sector. So we look after about 320 councils across the UK, and we advise 27 in Scotland. So we do quite a lot of work in Scotland. And I wanted to touch on some of the experiences that we've seen through the public sector side of things, which will link to all of the SMEs and everybody else across Scotland. One thing that we are quite keen to get across when we talk about this area is a lot of webinars that you'll go on will tell you about how to achieve things and what vehicles can do, but they're quite light on numbers that are involved. We don't work that way because we have to advise people on spend. And funny enough, we're having to do it very significantly in Scotland for all of our Scottish authorities at the moment. So we, as I say, Link our treasury management investment advisor, asset finance advisor, very large client base in relation to public sector. I've been doing this for 26 years as an asset finance advisor, looking at all forms of finance, leasing, should you actually lease, should you buy, options appraisals, all of this, which is what we undertake for the clients. So we've got electric vehicles here, sort of costs versus ICE equivalent, charging and other areas that we need to come across and just think about really. So when it comes to electric vehicles, particularly when you look at heavy vehicles, some of the bits that we've had to come across, lots of conversations, Dawn alluded to it earlier, involved the utility companies, particularly if you have a slightly larger fleet. Will you need to upgrade the grid in your area? And if so, what sort of cost is that going to incorporate for you? Some of the larger fleets, when you look across the public sector, you're getting into well over 1,000 vehicles. So these are to the point of not just grid upgrades, but new substations, really, really expensive. One other option now, of course, battery storage, which has been alluded to. Very useful technology. You can also pull the power down, hold it, so you're not draining the local grid at peak times, so that you can then release that. And also there's a lot of software available now that will actually distribute that as and when it's required into your vehicles. But it comes across all this range anxiety, and people have again touched on it, as you can see the common theme, where electric can be great for certain areas. And I can look at someone like Dundee Council, who, they've gone across to electric very heavily across their fleet. They've engaged with the local community where, the children actually applied to name vehicles, and they have their own Twitter account. So they're trying to engage with the community around what they're actually doing with those vehicles. But range anxiety is still quite a key area there. So one client, Highland Council, they're at the point where, because geographically they're enormous, nearly the size of Belgium, or as they like to say, Wales plus a bit, it's just not always going to work to be able to operate EVs. So they're actually going down a slightly different route, and they have a project online at the moment to develop 6 smaller hydrogen facilities where they will produce their own hydrogen. Aberdeen City and Aberdeenshire are looking to do the same, and are actually had an a find a tender service notice placed for the construction of a complete hydrogen facility. You look at Glasgow, they've announced 19 hydrogen RCVs. You've got other authorities in Scotland who've already moved across to electric RCVs and are taking delivery of vehicles and actually using them. But range anxiety is always a key point, not just for the heavies, but also some of the lights that people have alluded to. What about if people take their vehicles home? How do we deal with that type of solution with light commercial vehicles? And there are ways to do it. And some authorities have introduced where they will install the charging points, and there is actually specific software. So when you charge your vehicle and it's a work vehicle, it's actually the council who is actually charged for it. So you don't have all the hassle of trying to, try and get them to make a claim for expenses, etc. It can actually be tailored to be done that way. But if you move on from the range anxiety, mobile batteries were alluded to. Well, yes, they are great and they are temporary measures, etc. But they're £25,000 just for a smaller one. Yes, it can help. Yes, it can boost the charge, but there's another vehicle having to come out and charge something else. So are you going to run both electric? Because if you're running one on ICE and one electric, it's sort of defeating the object. You then move across, of course, to hydrogen. And a lot of people are looking at this, but at the moment, hydrogen is a more expensive solution than EV, as we're all aware. Now, infrastructure is key, again, for electrics and also for hydrogen. At the moment, trying to charge with hydrogen is very hard to do, as we all know. It's not like you can just pull up to the garage. Even with EV, it's still an issue across all of Scotland that there isn't enough infrastructure. And one of the challenges there is people are trying to encourage private investment to increase the infrastructure all across Scotland. Well, that's fantastic. But at the moment, a lot of the electricity that's provided through EV charging points is free. Now, private companies won't come in and invest for loads of infrastructure to get no funding back. But if a charging model is introduced, will they consider that? And that's quite an innovative solution that people can start looking at. But if they can say we can charge for the electricity and longer term we will recover that and generate a commercial return on it, suddenly it becomes more of an attractive proposal. Cost, of course, very significant when it comes to infrastructure. If you look at infrastructure for a refuse vehicle, you're looking at 25k for a pretty standard one, going up to 70 odd K if you go for very high powered fast charging units. And then Dawn sort of stole my thunder from when we were having a chat earlier. Remember Scottish Fire, the fire authority. If you're dealing with hydrogen, you need to make them aware, particularly if you're going to bunker, due to the fact it's a very different issue if they have to be called out to some form of emergency. Engage with them, please, along with utility companies, etc. There's a lot of collaborative working now between the authorities trying to say, well, let's come together as a group of authorities, Highland, Aberdeen City, Aberdeenshire. Is there a joint project that we can look to do to try and increase infrastructure? And you've got the Scottish Investment Bank that people can try and approach for innovative solutions, which is also the corporate and public sector world. There's also the UK Infrastructure Bank. These are two new entities, again, corporate and public sector. But what sort of vehicles have you got? Well, one of the things that's coming out is the new 4D Transit. That's due out sort of very early next year, and there's a lot of people excited about that. It's about 44,000 with a 200-mile range, which compared to something like the Renault, the ZE with a 75-mile range, makes quite a difference. And it is cheaper than the Renault product. But if you look at the costs here, 5.5 ton of Iveco, that's 154,000. Think about what the ICE equivalent is. The Mercedes Canter, the Iveco, 158 again for a 7.5 ton vehicle. This is, as Dawn alluded to, it's at least double, sometimes more in certain sectors. You then move through something like sweepers. So that's a compact sweeper. A diesel is at 80, it's 180,000 for the electric equivalent. So at the moment, it's more than double. So you're talking over 100% increases on the capital costs. Now let's look at a large sweeper. Again, something that's used quite heavily across the public sector. The diesel would be, the ICE, 145. Look at the electric, 380, because of the component parts. Now, when you're starting to get into large fleets, and this also applies to yourselves with the corporate world, that's a huge, huge premium. Now, one that's always is very interesting is, of course, waste. And of course, a lot of councils are involved in waste. So a 26-ton RCV, and the principles behind this still apply to other types of vehicles. It's just giving an example here. So that's a diesel waste vehicle there, 188,000 for a spec for that client. Now, if you want to take a look at something like the Dennis ERCV, which is a very common electric refuse vehicle, it's used across Europe, everything else, wow, 436,000. That is a massive increase. If you wanted to look at hydrogen, there are indications of what the pricing will be from Mercedes. Currently around £680,000. Now, as a corporate entity, that's really hard to try and justify. And this is where Dawn alluded to that some form of grant funding, incentives, maybe from Transport for Scotland, EST, need to start coming into play. But that, those are huge, huge numbers. So if we then move through, and this is the reason I wanted to share my screen. As I said, we like to talk about figures. So we've got examples here of a diesel option, and these are 5-year inclusive leases. So these have the finance and the maintenance put into those. And as you can see from this, you've got an electric option versus the diesel options. You can then see capital cost per unit. You can see the difference there, what the leases are. Now, there's not a huge one when it comes to pool cars. And this is taken from a local authority fleet where they've asked us to do a piece of comparison work on if we look at electric versus ICE. You then move into the community teams, slightly large vehicles, again, 360, 3080 per year. So, like commercial range and cars, you can see there's a much more comparative difference, far more well-established market. much more established second-hand market. Again, Dawn alluded to this. What are the residual values? And at the moment on things, at 5 years, you'll still get very attractive residual values from leasing companies. That works. You then start moving into the light world, and you can start seeing some massive differences here, particularly when you look at the electric versus the ICE. A medium van, yes, there is a premium, but don't forget that some of that is offset by savings because of fuel costs, etc. If I look at an RCV over 5 or 7 years, yes, there is a premium, even by the time you factor in the savings from electric and ICE costs. But when you start coming down to the 3.5 ton tipper, capital cost 58k versus 26.5 nearly 5k for the diesel option, nearly 12 for the electric. There is still a premium. Of course, you then move into the heavy world, and this is where it becomes quite scary numbers. So if you look at a 26 ton RCV there, electric option, you're looking at about 85k to actually fund that at the moment with maintenance costs. You look at the ICE, it's 48. It is still a huge, huge difference. There is still a premium, unfortunately. At 7 years, it is still more expensive, even by the time you factor in revenue savings across fuel. At 5 years, even more of a premium. And it isn't 10 or 20,000 pounds. It's still a very significant number, I'm afraid. And we're seeing lots of innovative solutions. We've got a client at the moment, they've just taken a load of diesels. They're looking to retrofit to make it dual fuel to hydrogen. We've got people looking at retrofitting other vehicles. We've got people taking brand new electric, people to ordering brand new hydrogen. And of course, the public sector fleets have very specific targets from the government. But look at the principal cost there. When you look at the capital cost, 6 million to 11.3. Leasing wise, 1.8, 3.4, you are talking double the costs. And that's electric before you look at the hydrogen solutions. Now, the authorities are trying to work more and more and engage with your authorities. I'd say that as well, due to the fact that they need to try and promote stuff across the community as well, not just for their own fleets and their own vehicles. You've got the pop-up charging points, not just the stand ones, the ones that fit into the ground. Those are popping up everywhere. But it's a very interesting time with a lot of pressure. Now, leasing, when you look at percentage increases on some vehicles, reduces the impact of the capital cost increase because of residual values. As yet, for the heavy goods vehicles, unfortunately, no. Everyone is too nervous about what's it going to be worth in 5, 6, 7 years' time, because the market is still first generation. So virtually, it's a sort of funding exercise, and that is it. There's not really much in the way of residual value in the heavy goods sector. Lights, very different story. You can get 40% residual values, but doesn't always mean you should lease it. Leasing is a tool in everybody's armory. And it is a case of, is it value for money? Is it not? Is it better for me to buy? Because I'm going to keep it X amount of time because of the mileage. And that was it. Whistle stop from me. More of a public sector slant, as I said. But we do deal with a significant number of councils who are doing innovative things. Some are doing things that we have to say, please don't do it. But that's part of our challenge in our life. But numbers to us are critical. So seeing the numbers and knowing what it costs rather than we're being indicated. And as I say, people are very light around some of this. But there you go. Back to you, Dan.